Welcome to In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson. Join Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible, both from Milligan College, as they bring you their thoughts and knowledge of the study of the Sunday School lesson for the day. Now, here is Dr. Gwaltney.
Friends, it's so good to be with you again this morning in the study of the written scripture and in the Word. And we are concluding what has been a long quarter's work on the call of God to people through history, Old Testament times and the time of the beginning of the church. It's, for me, been a very exciting study, and we hope that it has been profitable for you. And again, Dr. Magnus is here, and we enjoy one another, and we enjoy the work that we do, and we hope that you do.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about what seems to me to be in the book of Acts a critical turning point.
No doubt about it. It's very important. It's central. It's pivotal, I think would be a good word to say. It's not the first that we sometimes call it. We sometimes say this is the first Gentile convert to Christianity.
No.
And I've been taught that. I've heard people say that. It isn't. There were Gentiles, proselytes, who were converted on the day of Pentecost. They were
Right.
ethnic Gentiles. And then the Ethiopian man we read about in chapter 8 a couple weeks ago.
And somehow there were Christians in Cyrene in North Africa.
Yeah.
And
Cyprus.
How that happened?
Yeah. So there are Gentiles who are believers before this one. But this is a very pivotal moment when you have a high-ranking army officer of the Roman Empire becoming a Christian. And the other thing that's so significant about this story is that it shows a change that takes place in Peter's thinking. And that is going to...
There has to be a definite change in the thinking of the leadership of the church.
There does. And that leads to a change in the thinking of the whole church, realizing that the Christian movement, the Way, as they called it, is not just going to be a sect of Judaism, but is going to be for all people.
In all likelihood, if it had remained just another form of Judaism, it would have ceased to exist.
Surely it would have, yeah. Now, the background to the story of Peter's encounter with Cornelius, this Roman army officer, has Peter traveling from Jerusalem, where he's still living and ministering, out north and west on what I call a pastoral journey.
It's kind of like a coastal journey, isn't
Yes,
it?
he's headed for the coast, westward to the Mediterranean coast, and he's visiting Christians as he goes, Christian congregations. Right. So that's why I call it's actually a pastoral journey rather than an evangelistic
We don't hear
journey.
of him preaching in it. He may have, but we're not told he did.
We were not. So he comes to the town of Lydda, modern Lode. Yeah.
Where the airport is,
right.
or near there.
And ministers there and does some healing. And then he goes to Joppa on the coast.
Yes.
And raises Tabitha and is staying
and
there.
Joppa is where Tel Aviv is now.
Mm-hmm. And so he's been visiting Christians and ministering to them. And then a series of events happens that brings him into contact with Cornelius.
Now, where were they at that point, geographically?
Yeah, well,
he's moved north now.
Yeah,
the
story starts with Peter in Joppa,
yes,
but then quickly moves up to Caesarea, about 30 miles north up the coast.
And the reason why would Cornelius be in Caesarea, and that's Caesarea on the coast?
Yeah, well, that is the Roman capital of Palestine.
Well, we need to say something about Herod the Great in regard to that location, because it was a wonderful location on the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful place. But Herod previously had spent a fortune on developing it as the seaport for all of Palestine.
Yes.
And he brought stones all the way from Egypt, or had them brought, of course.
And the coastline of Israel is very smooth, and there are not a lot of natural harbors along it.
Right.
So he had to put all these huge stones out into the Mediterranean Sea to make a breakwater to create a harbor.
He created a harbor
Yeah.
out of,
Yeah, and then built a beautiful Greek style Roman city with temples and government buildings and
Oh, I
basilicas.
remember the
and-
amphitheater there.
and it's just every building was gorgeous, and this was his showplace
Right.
to the Roman world.
And named it for Caesar.
Yeah, Caesarea.
Thanks to Herod the Great, here is this wonderful port, and that became the capital for the force, the Roman force that they would have there to enforce their will.
So the Roman army is barracked
And
there.
the barracks are there.
Yeah.
And there's something else there that is, I think, very interesting. There is a shrine to Mithra. There was a shrine to Mithra.
Mithra is a Persian god, but when the Roman army came into contact with that religion as they were fighting the Parthians over there
In the east,
in the
yes.
east, many of the Roman soldiers converted to Mithraism,
Right.
and brought that back west with them.
There were Mithra shrines in Rome, Italy, and
Corinth.
and
found them in Corinth.
other European
Yeah.
places
Yeah.
because of the Roman army. Yeah.
So that's the location. Now, the immediate background of this story tells us the famous story of Peter's vision on the rooftop around noon. I guess he was hungry. A vision of a sheet let down with unclean animals in it.
Apparently,
All-
nothing but unclean
Yeah.
animals.
And
Snakes
in
and
the
what have
vision, in the vision, he hears the words "kill and eat," and this brings about a kind of a crisis of conscience.
Well, he sees the same vision 3 times.
Yeah, and so this brings about a crisis of conscience. Am I supposed to obey what appears to be a heavenly vision, or am I supposed to obey the Jewish food laws that are enshrined in the
the
book,
Torah,
in Leviticus?
Yeah, right.
But that becomes a very important springboard to a series of events that will lead up to the conversion of Cornelius and Cornelius's friends and relatives.
Again, Peter is told by God what the meaning of the vision is. Don't call any man unclean,
Yeah,
which God has
Right.
termed clean.
yeah. Now, Peter should have known that from his relationship with Jesus. He should have, already had that theoretically in his mind for 2 reasons. Jesus had already declared all foods clean.
Yes.
We know that
Yeah.
from the Gospels. And
But Peter still says, I have never eaten anything unclean.
Even though Jesus did. Jesus had taught him that. Plus, Jesus had modeled an openness toward Gentiles.
Right.
You think of his encounters with a Roman centurion and healing the slave, or
Yes,
the
yeah.
Syrophoenician woman not
Right.
far north of here. So I think theoretically, but Peter hadn't put this into practical action in
You
his
can
life
see
yet.
these things, and when they are recalled to you, you remember them and say, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But at the time, you may not get the message that you're being shown it in actual life.
Okay, so let's read. If you'll read for us, and this follows immediately on the triple vision of the unclean animals.
Let me say one thing.
Okay.
That Cornelius is identified as to this cohort. And as luck would have it, we have information about this cohort. Allow me to read.
Okay.
It was cohort 2, the Italica Civium Romanorum
The Italian cohort.
cohort. And in 69, general of the army, Vespasian, who had was attacking Jerusalem. And he was called back to Rome to throw his hat in the ring to be emperor. And this cohort accompanied him and supported him to become the next emperor. Afterwards, they returned to Palestine for a while, and we have record of this cohort as late as 157 AD. We have all that information from Roman records, so it's well known.
Very
now,
important.
say something quickly about the organization of the Roman army. How was it organized?
The Roman army was broken into cohorts of about 6,000 soldiers.
A legion, wasn't it? A legion of 6,000.
A legion.
If it were full.
Legion. And then those are headed up by what's sometimes called tribunes. And then there's smaller units called centuries.
Well, you have a cohort. You have a legion as the largest. Then you have a cohort, which is about 600, you say? And then the 600.
Well, it's about 1,000, because you
About
have
1,000.
a tribune is called a chiliarch. That means the ruler of 1,000.
1,000.
Yeah.
And then that is subdivided into centuries.
Right.
Which means 100.
100 soldiers, and a centurion would be that. And then that's divided into what we might call platoons. They called them decades. That's groups of 10.
Groups of 10.
Yeah. So it was a highly organized army.
And these could be manipulated and moved very quickly from one position to another in order to respond to an attack.
So Cornelius, who is a centurion of the Italian cohort, is a very important Roman official,
Right.
Military official.
Yeah, right. And so we do know about this group. We don't, unfortunately, have any Roman record of this Cornelius, but the way he's characterized certainly fits what we know about the organization of a Roman army. Okay, let me begin reading in Acts chapter 10, verse 19. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so he could hear what you have to say." Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests. The next day, Peter started out with him, and some of the believers from Joppa went along. The following day, he arrived in Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter entered the house, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet in reverence. But Peter made him get up. "Stand up," he said. "I'm only a man myself." While talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. He said to them, "You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without raising any objection. May I ask why you sent for me?" Cornelius answered, 3 days ago I was in my house praying at this hour, at 3 p.m. Suddenly a man in shining clothes stood before me and said, "Cornelius, God has heard your prayer and remembered your gifts to the poor. Send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter. He is a guest in the home of Simon the tanner, who lives by the sea." So I sent for you immediately, and then it was good of you to come. Now we are all here in the presence of God to listen to everything the Lord has commanded you to tell us. Now there's more that
much
follows,
more to the
but
story.
we'll refer to it later.
You know, the one thing I was reflecting on our discussion of the Roman army, it's important to remember that this Roman army that was stationed there in Caesarea is an invading army.
Yes.
That is the army of the oppressive enemy. The Jews don't want those soldiers there.
They're not particularly welcome.
No, they're not there to
They're
protect
tolerated.
them. They're not there really to protect them. They're there to maintain control.
We know that there was a whole legion in Syria, Palestine, that was assigned there, but the cohort seems to be the house guard, the main guard for the seat of government.
And there was a governor there.
Yes, that's where the governor
I just want to make sure this was not a welcome army.
No.
Okay. No. This is the army of the oppressors.
It's not like the American army coming into Paris at the end of World War II.
Right.
No.
Or into Italy with the welcome.
Yeah.
Well, verse 19 tells us that Peter was thinking about the vision, and that's this vision of the sheet and the unclean animal.
Right.
And clearly, he is processing that vision well, because in verse 28, at the end of verse 28, he says, "But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean."
You're right.
So he's made the connection from that vision that he's been thinking about to the question, can I associate socially with Gentiles?
Right.
And he has come to the position, yes, I can at least do that.
Right. And he calls attention to the fact, I'm not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
But we're going to find out he is doing something, he had been doing something else he wasn't supposed to do either. Mm-hmm. Because Simon the tanner is low on the totem pole. He's Jewish and he's accepted as a Jew, but there are limitations on what a tanner can do because he stinketh.
Tanning hides involved using chemicals and products.
And it gave you an odor.
It was a filthy profession.
And that's why he's by the sea. But now Peter, who is supposedly, kosher in all regards, at least he thinks he is, will go in and live with and enjoy the hospitality of a tanner. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that he, for him, a Jewish tanner who is low on the Jewish totem pole is higher than Cornelius, who is
a noble
colonel
man.
In the army.
Yeah, because Cornelius is a Gentile.
Yeah,
that's what he's struggling with.
That's even worse.
That's what he's struggling with.
Yeah.
So the Spirit, after this vision, says, "Go with them. Do not hesitate to go with them."
That's an interesting choice of words.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Spirit who is saying to him all the way through Acts. Mm-hmm. It's the Spirit that's directing. It just seems to me in one situation after another. Mm-hmm. The Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of God, is guiding what happens.
Yeah. Well, it's in verse 22 that we learn a little bit about Cornelius. He's not only a prominent Roman military officer, we learn that he's been attracted to Judaism.
Well, and even he's reached a stage that we know was well on the way toward becoming proselyte. To be a God-fearer is more than just a generic statement. Yeah. He feared God. Yeah. It means that he is in the process. It doesn't mean he will finish the process necessarily, but he has at least begun that process. And he's carrying on a Jewish kind of lifestyle.
The fact that he's called righteous here probably means that he has adopted many of the life practices of a Jew
Right.
in obedience to the law.
And look at the characteristics of him, how he is described as a person who prays frequently, and that means prays the Jewish prayers, but also contributes to the poor.
Yeah.
And that is one of the cardinal marks of a really, shall we say, super Jew, to be generous in dealing with the poor.
Yeah. Yeah. Prayer, almsgiving were two of the most important activities of a Jew.
Isn't it interesting that Jesus talks about them in the Sermon on the Mount?
Yeah. Right. And so Cornelius is, and he probably attends synagogue worship as well.
Yes.
Because later on in the book of Acts, when Paul would go to synagogues, he would be preaching about Jesus not only to ethnic Jews, but to God-fearing Gentiles who were in attendance at synagogue worship.
So really he had an inclusive audience he was speaking to. Paul and others who are preaching in the synagogue. It's not just purely Jewish,
right?
Especially outside of Palestine.
And that's why the synagogue was such an important springboard to Christian evangelism throughout the empire.
Yes.
Well, Peter is hospitable to the messengers from Cornelius. He invites them into the house.
It's interesting. Peter invites them into Simon's house.
Simon's house.
Come on
in. Maybe Simon was down at the tanning shop, the tanning building, and so he's acting like the host here. By the way, the journey from Caesarea down to Joppa and therefore back is about 30 miles, a little over 30.
A little over 30 miles.
30 miles.
Which was a 2-day walk.
Yeah.
And when we count the days, we don't know how the 3 from Cornelius got there, but it appears that Peter is going with 6 people.
6 fellow Christians.
I made myself a note up here. Peter and 6 brothers go to, and I put down, take witnesses.
Yeah. Well, the Jews believe that you needed to have 2 or 3 witnesses to validate anything.
So he doubles it.
He's doubling that because he
Don't
knows
be half-saved.
he's doing something risky here that many of his fellow Christians will question.
Well, he's challenged on it in chapter 11.
Yes, he's going to be questioned on this.
Why did you do that?
Yeah. Now Cornelius, on the other hand, is just so confident that his vision from God is going to be fulfilled that he's gathered up a group of friends and relatives in anticipation of Peter's arrival.
Now, this is not unusual. When an officer, a high-ranking officer of the Army goes, he can take his family with him, and it is not unusual for him to have a private villa and entertain all kinds of people there and live really an extravagant kind of life. And this must have been a really rich, fashionable home for him,
Yeah. His response to Peter's arrival in verse 25 is interesting because he falls at his feet in reverence as if Peter is some kind of a holy man himself, and Peter has to quickly correct him and say, "No, I'm just a guy like you."
I'm a man too.
Yeah.
But I'm not inferior to you. I have that feeling that he's saying we are equals as far as the Lord is concerned.
Right.
You're an officer. I'm a fisherman, but that makes no difference.
And that would be an important message to a high-ranking official who's used to thinking of himself as the boss.
Right.
I love verse 28. He makes it very clear, and he wants them to know that it is against the law for him as a Jew to associate or to come into social contact with a Gentile.
This is a Pharisee position. If you're going to buy a horse from a Gentile, you send an agent. You don't have the direct contact.
Okay.
You send an agent.
And so, Peter is admitting to his own hesitation here, but then quickly goes on in the latter part of verse 28 to explain that God has transformed his thinking as far as his ability to associate with Gentiles.
Let's talk. We don't have very much more time. Well, why don't we talk about the outcome of what happened?
Two more major steps occur. When Peter arrives, he hears in verse 30 and following about the vision that Cornelius received. And in that vision,
A double vision.
Yes, again, a double vision. Cornelius is told in the vision to send for Peter and to do whatever Peter tells, or to listen to what he tells him. This is the preaching of the gospel. So on the basis of Peter's own vision, he associates with Gentiles. On the basis of Cornelius's vision, he feels justified in preaching the gospel to Gentiles. That's the second big step. The third step comes when the Holy Spirit falls upon those who are gathered listening to the gospel, and
they speak in tongues
and
glorify God
the way the apostles had
on
back on the day of Pentecost, glorifying God. And that's what gives Peter the realization that there's nothing, like the Ethiopian man said, what hinders me from being baptized?
Isn't it interesting? In both cases, it winds up in the water.
Yeah. So Peter says, well, it looks like you're ready and the Spirit is ready. So
and the Spirit has spoken.
Let's take the next step.
I don't have a choice here.
and so they are baptized. And that's the end of the story with Cornelius. But the story goes on. There's fallout in chapter 11 where some of the more Pharisaical Jewish converts to Christianity back in Jerusalem question his actions. And so he rehearses. He just tells them what happened and says,
I've got 6 witnesses
yes,
who will verify everything I'm saying. And so the assembly back in Jerusalem then has no choice but to rejoice.
Yes, and they do.
And
even the original complainants, it appears, joined the rejoicing. Once they understood.
I don't think they really all entirely quit in their position. Mm-hmm. I think you could make a devil's advocate case for their position. We don't have time to do that. But at the same time, the issue was theoretically settled in Acts 15, where the whole issue was discussed by the church, and a resolution was arrived at.
But even Peter is going to continue to struggle with this. It's just so hard to break.
Galatians, isn't it?
It's so hard to break those old habits.
And maybe Barnabas
that our culture,
troubled.
Yeah, puts into it. Let me mention one other thing. A prophet named Jonah went to Joppa. God told him to go preach to Gentiles, and he went the opposite direction. Simon Bar-Jonah, son of Jonah, went to Joppa. God told him to go preach to Gentiles, and he did.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a difference between 2 Jonahs there.
There is. There's a difference.
Well, this concludes this really wonderful study that we have done, and we've been so thankful to be able to do it. And we will begin a completely new unit quarter next week, and we are looking for you to be with us. We wish we could welcome you each one by name, and this is communication only in one direction, I guess. But we're so glad to be with you every Sunday. And may the love of God be with you this week.
This has been In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson with Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible from Milligan College, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible of Milligan College. Join us again next week for another lesson from the International Bible School lesson text. This has been a production of the First Christian Church Television Ministries.